Welcome everyone. So nice to see everyone. I feel and see you again for those of you who are with us on Tuesday. So I'm Claudia Green. For anyone who doesn't know me, the Director of English for New Bostonians. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to ask a couple. I know as we discussed, we all know how to mute, but I'm going to ask a favor of you, if you could, to go up into your, like, you know how at the top of your screen, those little blue three dots, to identify yourself with your program, like with your name and your program, because it would be super helpful to some folks on the call who don't know which program that you're with. So if you could do that, just so, as I am Claudia Green, English for New Bostonians, that would be really helpful. And that's my housekeeping. I think we all got the mute thing down, right? And feel free to use the chat function as we go forward. And as you know, we are going to be broken up into small groups, but feel free to use the chat to comment, ask questions during the session. I want to just, before we get started, I want to just make sure everyone here sees the EMB staff, and I want to thank the EMB staff who, like every single person, and I know all of you as well, I just want to shout out the EMB staff right now for the amazing work that they've been doing, like, you know, since March 12th or 13th on this and through this crisis. So Lee, who has organized this event today, and Luis, who I know you've all worked with, Luis Franco, who's our training and technical assistance coordinator, and Franklin Peralta, our English Works campaign organizer, who's been doing amazing work with our restaurant classes and organizing many other things this spring, including helping with the town hall we did earlier this week. Evelyn Norman, some of you may not have met, is our development and communications director, who started on day one of the pandemic. Giovanni Velasco is the development and communications coordinator. He's there with the EMB logo, of course. And Hussam Hamad is our New Americans Integration Program, AmeriCorps member, who's been working with many of you. And Jimena Morales, who is on with us today and has done amazing, just joined us. She's a rising junior at Harvard, and she's an intern with us this summer and helped in organizing many events, including this one and some other ones that you have or will be attending in the next few weeks, and also helping with interviews and surveys and focus groups. And Susan Claw is on, and as you know, leads our ESL for Parents initiative, and will be helping to lead one of the small groups. And I'm hoping I did not leave anyone out. Okay. Good. I'm sure someone will tell me if I did. And I just want to quickly I want to congratulate all of you and thank you. I know this has been a hell of a spring. And I know some of you already have wrapped up classes and will be, coming to an end shortly. But I know for all, I just, remind you to think about the fact that sort of when history is written and we all look back on this, and how you think about what you've been doing and what your record, your personal record for what you've been doing, and you've been teaching, you've been learning, you've been leading, you've been keeping yourself and your families and your students healthy, and most importantly, I think, or equally importantly, you've been ensuring that some of the hardest hit people in this pandemic have been staying connected and staying informed and moving forward. And that's really tremendous work that you've been doing. And I thank you. And we all, I think on behalf of English for New Bostonians, a huge thank you. We look forward to, part of the reason we hosted this, we wanted to host this day today, is just to kind of have a collective sigh. We've gotten this far, and to begin looking forward. We really look forward to learning from all of you, to hearing from you what's needed. And so thank you, and we'll go forward. Thanks. I'll turn over to Lee. Lee, you're on mute. Here we go.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Okay. How's that? Everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So let's go on. Welcome. Okay. I just want to echo Claudia's thanks. This has been a crazy spring. And I want to celebrate what happened and how quickly all of us have been capable of learning. The online pivot that we all did on around March 15th maintained student engagement. Teachers used a variety of platforms. What this meant was most teachers were engaging students across multiple platforms. So a teacher was making voice calls to students, sending texts, using WhatsApp, using Zoom, Google Classroom, Schoology, monitoring student progress in a variety of ESL distance learning programs such as USA Learns or Duolingo. Instead of checking off an attendance sheet when people came to class, teachers were tracking participation and engagement in learning in all these different formats. Formative assessment meant tracking learning in all these new ways. Because students were participating at all hours, teachers were working at all hours to respond to students. And it's just been tremendous, but you know, we need to think hard about how to keep ourselves sustainable as professionals, as well as keeping students learning, you know, going forward. So what are realistic estimates of prep time and student engagement time in a remote setting? It's a question we need to figure out. Volunteers have really stepped up in this time also, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay, got two devices here so I can see my notes as well as share my screen. Okay, so this whole session is about planning for the fall, but some basic ENB business that I've shared by email, but just to repeat, we're not going to be funding summer classes. Most programs don't run, most ENB programs don't run very much in the summer anyway, but we are planning to put out an RFP at the end of June with decisions in early August. We hope to have a similar amount of money to grant out as in the past. We definitely want to maximize stability in the field in this time when we all need stability, to maximize stability of funding while promoting new thinking and planning for the fall. So, you know, this convening is a beginning of exploration of some ideas around that, and, you know, look forward to hearing more, but we really look forward to continuing to work with you all going forward. Okay. So we did a survey, as you know. You did a student survey. Thank you. We got hundreds of responses so far. The survey closes tomorrow, so we don't have we don't have final results yet. I know it's been a tremendous effort, you know, helping students fill out that survey, getting it out to them, reminding them. I can see how much you have reminded them by the number of duplicates that we've gotten. So we're not completely sure exactly how many responses we have so far, because there are some duplicates, which is not a problem. They're easy to remove, but you know, really reflects a huge effort. So early next week, we'll share each program's raw data back to you in the form of an Excel sheet, so you can see right away what the responses were from your program. And then we'll do ENB-wide analysis and share that with you also when it's ready. Some early evidence, some early results that we have. Our students say their biggest concern is the virus and health. That's, of course, that's on the top of everybody's minds. Jobs and economy are huge also. A lot of people said, I have two big concerns, you know, the virus and my job, the virus and the economy. Of the students who responded, those who were in the workforce, almost 40% of them lost their jobs. 8% of those in the workforce say they have a new job since March 15th. I know that that 8% is rising fast. Like a lot of people are back to work just as of last week, as of this week, as of a few days ago. That's going to be changing fast, but it's that the economic impact on those 40% who lost their jobs and were without jobs for 2 months, it's huge. And I don't need to tell you that, you know that. Students continued to like their classes and to find them helpful, and they want more. So, you know, with how busy the teachers have been, they really appreciate their teaching and they want more time learning. And, you know, we need to figure out how to help them learn, as I said, while being sustainable ourselves. Okay. So one thing we'd like to look at really carefully going into the fall is about recruitment, because what happened this spring was programs heroically maintained their engagement with the students who were already in their programs, and it was incredible. One program had only had class with a whole brand new cycle of students for a week or two before the shutdown, but they did at least have that 2 weeks. Going into the fall, we don't know whether we'll have that. And students need to be able to find you in ways that they haven't been able to before. One thing that we've been looking at is programs' web presence. So questions like, sorry, I'm on the wrong. Okay, I have a problem with my notes, but I'll just move on. Okay, so with program websites, does the program have a website? Most do, not all do. On the website, how easy or difficult is it to find the ESL program? There are some very large organizations, you know, with a lot of stuff on their web. How easily can students find what they need? If somebody does a Google search with the name of your ESL program, do they find it? If somebody does a Google search with Adult ESL Dorchester, is your program on the first page of the results? What's your social media presence? You know, a lot, is your program on Facebook? And does your program regularly participate in things like the neighborhood Facebook group or ethnic Facebook groups or Instagram groups? Some programs recruit really effectively through that. Then when somebody finds you, does the website clearly tell them what they need to do for the fall to register for classes? Or does it say, you know, for example, come to our office anytime? So we've done some analysis of this, and I can say that on a 1 to 5 scale, current E&B programs are all over the map with this kind of thing. And I encourage you to think about this really carefully and work on this soon. And I want to thank Jimena Morales, who Claudia introduced at the beginning, our intern this summer. She created this rubric and has done this analysis. She's also our Zoom master for this meeting, and she's only been with us a couple of weeks. So thank you, Jimena, for doing this. Oh, and one more thing on the last slide is, in general, we have about at least 50% new students going into the fall, and classes got a lot smaller in the spring. We are going to, you know, people are going to need to find us. Okay. About technology this spring, we, as you all know, we leveraged partnerships to get 100 Chromebooks, about 30 hotspots, 300 Wi-Fi enabled tablets into students' hands so they could continue learning. Teaching students to use them was a big challenge. This summer, we'll be writing a curriculum unit modeled on our ESL for Parents curriculum, so it'll be very practical and user-friendly. Susan Claw will be leading that work. To teach students up front the tech skills that they'll need to learn English next year, whether we start classes in person or remotely. As far as getting those devices into students' hands, we're working on partnerships for the fall. Partners are asking us questions like, are tablets better or worse than hotspots? Do people who receive tablets in the spring need broadband cable in their homes to continue learning in the fall? We, ENB, we need to talk with a small group of you to figure out what our ask is for technology to support ENB students in the fall, specifically what devices and so on are most helpful to teachers. What do we need? So please follow up with me or with Luis if you can help us think this through. And in terms of our fundraising and how we plan to package those needs and fundraise for them and distribute them to programs, it's separate from our regular program grants. Different funders and different partners are looking to support technology than support regular ESL classes. So we're hoping that we won't be building that support into the program grants, but providing that funding, those devices and support and whatever separately. Okay. So volunteers have really stepped up in this time. A few volunteers took over whole classes when their teachers got sick or couldn't continue, and it wasn't the right time to hire a new teacher. Many other volunteers facilitated Zoom small breakout rooms, helped teachers stay in touch with students by calls and texts, conducted mock interviews. Many programs found the support of volunteers crucial in helping students troubleshoot access issues during class so that teachers could stay focused on teaching. Some of the barriers we had faced in the past with volunteers suddenly weren't an issue. For example, geography barriers. In the past we had trouble finding enough volunteers for East Boston, relative to the need. And now a volunteer can, help remotely from anywhere. Going into next year, English for New Bostonians, Allies for Immigrants Volunteer Corps can be a resource for programs. This is a partnership with Boston Cares. So Boston Cares recruits volunteers and helps us track them. We train them and support programs in deploying them. And we have, we've had 11 programs so far participate as Allies programs. We could expand that next year with enough volunteer capacity. So let us know if you're not an Allies for Immigrant program and you would like that support from volunteers as we're going into next year. I'd like to shout out the Maverick Landing Community Services English Innovations class. Many of you met Antonio at our fall Grantee Convening where he was on a panel describing his class. In the English Innovation Service model, the teacher sets up activities where volunteers help students carry them out in small groups. The English Innovations curriculum, it's a national project and it's currently run through the National Partnership for New Americans. We've been talking with them about the fall. They are going to be happy to have new programs join. There's no cost. They're providing training. They're revising the curriculum, and which is robust. There's been a lot of influx with that English Innovations program administratively, so it's hard to find on the web, but I'll be sending out information about that and providing more support. It's a really promising instructional model to look at for the fall that's flexible in person, face-to-face, but not in person, such as Zoom or distance or hybrid. Okay, so overall about teaching and learning, this time has shown us some advantages and disadvantages. So Zoom is so different from a classroom. People's houses where they're learning are very different from classrooms. There's a lot that is under teachers' control, in a regular classroom that isn't under their control in Zoom. You can move tables around, you can put posters on the walls, you can set up, you can quickly move students around from one group and different groupings to others if you're in a regular classroom. You don't need to worry about interruptions that aren't coming from your agency. You all know all of that. One strength of online learning is increased possibility for self-directed learning. And some programs, especially teaching higher levels possibly, have been able to really take advantage of that, setting students up on programs like Duolingo and USA Learns, giving extensive assignments that involve things like students preparing and delivering presentations to their classmates. Zoom is a great format for that. Some students, by using independent platforms, were able to move faster. This self-paced learning can increase differentiation of the learning experience during the remote time. However, the face-to-face time on Zoom is much less differentiated. It's very hard to differentiate instruction in a Zoom classroom, and it tends to be like trying to get everybody on the same sort of low bar, the same page for the whole group time. So it's really a challenge, and there's a lot to think through instructionally. Instructors experimented with new models for participation, including flipped classes, where people do a lot of preparation outside of class time, and then they come in just for the interactive portion. That's flipped. Sandwich classes. This was a new term for me pretty recently, where a class during the class time starts out all together on Zoom, and then they break and they do some independent work on their own, or possibly in a small group in a different Zoom place or something. And then they come back as a whole group at the end of the class time. And the Zoom 40-minute free time has forced some teachers to do this anyway. I know, especially before they got their paid accounts, but it's a promising model. Finally, I want to say that poor audio and web connections have been a huge problem, and especially for teaching speaking and listening and basic literacy like phonics skills. And going into the fall, to be able to effectively teach those skills, we really need to help with devices and with internet access so that people can communicate effectively orally while at a distance. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are some questions in the chat. And let's see, why don't I stop share? Go back to you all. Okay, I see some things in the chat. Has somebody who's been following the chat, can a staff person tell me a question? I just have time for 1 or 2 questions. What's an RFP?
Hey Lee, so Sarah Catarad was asking if we will have access to the slideshow later. That was the first question that I saw in chat.
Yes, thank you. Access to the slideshow later, and to recording of the whole group time, including what I said in my presentation and what Amanda's about to say. I want to welcome a special guest, and Franklin will introduce her in a minute, but yes, you'll have access to that. Anything else? Good questions about what do the students need to access technology. Yeah, it's a moving train we've been on. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. Raise your hand where I can see you if you've got a burning question or comment, and otherwise I'll turn it over to Franklin. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. It is my pleasure to introduce my friend and a friend of EMB, Amanda Berson-Chilcock. Amanda is the Senior Fellow at the National Skills Coalition in Washington, D.C. And in this role, Amanda works on adult education and workforce policies that support US-born and immigrant adults with foundational skills gaps. Prior to the National Skills Coalition, she was the Vice President of Policy and Evaluation at the Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians in Philadelphia. If her name is familiar to you, it's because she wrote the EMB Talking Jobs report a couple of years ago. So she knows a lot about some of your students when she wrote that report. In short, we are lucky to have a national expert on workforce development and adult education with us today. So thank you and welcome, Amanda.
Hey, thanks so much, Franklin and Lee and Claudia and the whole ENB team. I'm a huge admirer of English for New Bostonians and was very honored to be invited to chat with all of you today. I am coming to you from rainy, stormy, humid Philadelphia, which is actually where I live, even though we are based as an organization in Washington, D.C. Just very briefly, we are a 20-year-old nonprofit. Our job is policy advocacy, so we work at the state and the federal level to try to advance good policies that invest in adult education and workforce. We are not ourselves program providers, so we're not individually serving job seekers or adult learners, but we have 28,000 members across the country who are people exactly like you. In fact, some of you are our members, who are adult educators, who are community colleges, labor unions, labor management partnerships, workforce boards, businesses, industry associations, chambers of commerce, really anybody who shares a commitment to making sure that people have access to good jobs that can help them support their families. And when I was chatting with Lee and Franklin and everyone about sort of how to frame my remarks today, we agreed that I would just take a few minutes to give you some big picture perspective, and then we'll leave some time for questions and conversation. And I will say that honestly, the most fun part of my job is to hear from folks on the ground doing the work. So if you don't have a question and you just want to tell me something, please feel free to share an update about your program or your work that is short and sweet, so that we can make respectful use of everybody's time here. So we know that there are a lot of unknowns right now, probably more than at most times in most people's careers in adult education. Even though, of course, the history of adult education is that most of us kind of came into this field sideways, as we sort of affectionately say, right? Relatively few people started off by saying, this is what I'd like to be my life's work. And as we're trying to help our learners sort of navigate this uncertain moment and help our teachers and our program staff, it's helpful to hear what folks in other parts of the country are dealing with, in part because it can often be similar to what you're dealing with, and perhaps because there may be some resources. So the first piece of information I'm going to give you is probably just going to affirm things that you all already know. So I hope it will at least be comforting to hear that things that are probably bubbling up for you are also bubbling up for a lot of other people. Lee has sort of covered the pivot that so many of us made to providing online services this spring. And I want to say there is an interesting sort of national conversation happening right now about the difference between emergency remote teaching and high quality online learning. Emergency remote teaching is what a lot of folks got thrown into with very little notice this spring. High quality online learning is what we're all striving for, and hopefully will take some time this summer to kind of prepare for a fall. Now, some of you may already be there, and that's fabulous, but I want to be mindful and compassionate of all that's going on in the world and recognize that for a lot of us, emergency remote teaching has kind of been where it is. And there's a terrific short op-ed about this, which I'm happy to share so that Lee can send it around to everyone in the follow-up materials for this event. But I just wanted to sort of flag that as the first puzzle piece. The second puzzle piece is around digital inclusion. Now, some of you probably know this really well. For some of you, this may be a new definition. Digital inclusion is often defined as the three legs of the stool. The first, does the person have home broadband internet access? The second, do they have an up-to-date digital device that they can use? And the third, do they have the digital literacy skills to be able to access what they need. And if there's anything the pandemic has demonstrated in the last 3 months, it is that the United States has dramatically underinvested in all three areas. If you're not already members of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, I warmly encourage you to join their mailing list, which is free and easy. NDIA works on all three legs of the digital sort of inclusion stool. My organization really focuses on the digital literacy piece because we're a workforce and adult education organization. And so a couple of themes that we've heard from many of our members across the country echo things that Lee talked about in her opening remarks. I'm not going to belabor those, but I do want to emphasize we hear repeatedly that teachers and program staff are having the same type of issues around digital inclusion as learners. And so thinking as carefully and rigorously as we can when we're writing grant budgets, when we're responding to RFPs, and when we're doing program planning to really allow for the professional development that is needed to make sure that people are prepared to use the tools that they have available to them is critically important. We also know that there's a lot of uncertainty about the shape of this recession, right? Is this going to be a quick dive and then a quicker bounce back where a lot of folks go back to work relatively quickly? Or is it going to be a really long, slow slog, right? The last recession, the 2009 Great Recession, took 51 months for hiring to really come out of a key part of the trough. So that's more than 4 years, right? That's a long time. What we do know, what is absolutely definitive, is that the more English a person has, the more job opportunities are open to them. And that exists at really every level of the process, right? And so other research that I've done has kind of highlighted that every little bit of additional English helps, right? So if you go from speaking English fairly well to very well, each one of those steps is beneficial. If you go from having limited English literacy to having more comfort in at least basic literacy, that's very significant. We also know that foundational digital literacy skills that are portable and transferable are really important. So I'm not saying everyone needs to know Microsoft Office or everyone needs to know this or that piece of software. It's the foundational baseline skills. How do you react when you have an unusual web page presented in front of you? Can you navigate that? How do you react when you're presented with a device that you maybe haven't seen before or someone downloads a new app on your smartphone? So that's critically important information for us as adult educators working with English learners, right? Every little bit of English helps, and digital literacy really needs to be foundational and portable and transferable more so than any one particular piece of software. The third thing that we know is that having a sense of self-efficacy is incredibly powerful. And I don't mean to tell you that like that's new information, right? You're educators. Of course you know that having a sense of self-efficacy is critical for your students. But when people have the confidence that they know how to learn, that they know how to access the resources they need to figure out the parts they don't know, that puts them in a much stronger position, whether they are trying to apply for a job, whether they are trying to upskill within a current job, whether their employer has just thrown a whole new thing at them and said, oh, by the way, you know, last week you were a grocery store stock clerk, this week you are handling the Instacart mobile app, and you're going to have to deal with customers and provide good customer service through text messages. That's a big change, right? So having that sense of self-efficacy is really, really important. And I emphasize that because that's something that we all knew as educators pre-pandemic, but it's become even more important when people aren't physically in the same space and can't sort of look over each other's shoulders, give each other moral support, kind of have that group communal experience that we're all so familiar with from a classroom setting. We also know that integrating English and digital skills is just good pedagogy, right? So if you learn English in the context of learning how to use your smartphone, you're going to remember it better. If you learn how to use your smartphone in the process of building your English skills, you're going to remember those better, right? And so they are really mutually reinforcing. And the degree to which you can continue to sort of acknowledge that and be intentional about that in how you're structuring your assignments and your activities, the better off your learners will be in this really uncertain environment where a lot of us don't really know how to help our learners prepare for what may be coming next in the job market or what they might be contending with. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of last reminders. Again, as we were just talking, we want to be mindful of combining English and digital skills together to boost workers' employability. You want to make sure to tap into your learners' expertise, right? They are experts on their own lives. They know what they're seeing in the workplace. They know what's being asked of them. They know what they're hearing from friends and family who may still be working even if they're unemployed. That's intelligence, right? So gathering that intelligence from your learners is really important. Helping people build bridges from the familiar to the new is really important when we think about fragmented knowledge, right? Fragmented knowledge is this idea that maybe you can use your phone to text a photo to somebody, but you don't feel comfortable making a spreadsheet, right? So how do we help people build bridges from what they already know to what they need to know? The third piece of the puzzle is really around your workforce partners. Some of you may have tight partnerships already with job training programs or workforce boards. Some of you may have lesser relationships. I will say I've heard from several areas of the country, workforce programs suddenly waking up and realizing, oh gosh, my adult education partners are ahead of me when it comes to providing online services. And even though I often don't think to turn to my adult ed partners as being experts, actually, I should be thinking of them as experts, and here's a great reason to talk with them. So if you have the bandwidth, and some of you may not, but if you do, you know, reaching out to those workforce partners can be really valuable. If you have good relationships with employers, this is a great time to gather intelligence from them too about how the labor market is changing. And finally, just emphasizing again that what you're building in your learners is adaptability and resilience more than any single goal or piece of software or piece of English curriculum, but really that adaptability that's always been important, but is even more important in a post-pandemic world. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here for any questions and discussion. And again, don't feel that you have to ask me questions. I know that all of you have your own expertise. So if there are observations you want to share, I'd love to hear those too.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was awesome. So somehow I lost to see the people. Maybe we can take away the slide. Yeah, here we go. So how, if you have questions, raise your hand, and I'm gonna pass it back to Lee.
Thank you, Franklin. I was having trouble figuring out how to facilitate people asking questions while continuing to share her screen, but it's not possible. I can go back to sharing it if it makes sense to do that. You can you can raise your hand with a reaction or just by going like that, or in the chat. Yeah, I see some comments in the chat. Every student has gained confidence to use technology. Yes, one piece of technology in the home is not enough. Kids, along with the parents, are using them. They need multiple devices. Kids may have a BPS issued Chromebook, but parents can't get on it. Yeah, Amanda, thank you. That was wonderful, and I'm so glad that we're recording this, and we'll be able to make the recording available to all of you, and I'll be able to watch it again too when I'm not multitasking.
Could
I will also say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, thank you, Amanda. It's really great to hear this, much of just kind of putting it all together, I think, for us. As as you know, like from people who've been doing this work over the last 3 months and learning so much, I'm curious just to say a little more of like how you think, I feel like the changes in the labor market are going to be they may be slow and they may be fast in different sectors, and like, just a little more on like what you would say, how you think we all can keep tabs on that. How do we keep ourselves informed? I know the suggestion about hearing from students, but as we as ESL, as ESL programs are trying to guide students, like what do you think that we can do to keep ourselves informed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is most of the usual ways you would try to do that aren't helpful right now, right? Because there's very good state and federal government data, but that data is usually between 3 months and a year old. And that's really not useful right now. So I just want to acknowledge that this is genuinely a tough problem, right? The first thing I would point to is who are your established allies and friends, right? Some of you may be with smaller organizations that don't have a formal employer relationship or workforce training component. Some of you may be connected to organizations like a community college workforce training partner or a big nonprofit like JEVS in Boston that does have a ton of employer relationships, and they may be able to share intelligence in some cases about what they're hearing from their employer partners. Being mindful of what your local workforce board is posting, both in terms of what kind of training they're offering, is important. But I think the other thing to think about is there are lots of places that are sources of jobs that are not for-profit companies, right? And Boston is particularly true in this respect just because there are so many hospitals and universities. But being mindful that, we're in a phase now where there's bipartisan support in Congress for funding new contact tracer positions in the health field. Congress passed a huge bill that the Senate is not going to pass in its current form, but my guess is the contact tracing piece will happen. Those are jobs that are entry-level or mid-level jobs that could very well be done by English learners, and that often need cultural and linguistic competency. So keeping your ear out for announcements about, and if you're not on the National Skills Coalition mailing list, I can put a plug for you to be on our mailing list, to find out where there is federal investment coming from to fund those kinds of new jobs is really important. My guess is a lot of you did some work last year and earlier this year on census jobs, and that's also an important puzzle piece to keep in mind. The other thing is to think about, are there sources of faster turnaround jobs data that would be helpful? And here I would caution you to be careful, right? There are for-profit companies like Burning Glass, and their whole business model is that they look at all the online job postings and then they produce a report telling you about the trends in online job postings. But the reality is that not every job opening that exists is posted online. So they're giving you a partial picture. That being said, because it's a really fast turnaround, right? They're on the web all the time and they're always crawling on job postings. It's much faster data than government data at this point. Some of their data costs money, but some of their data is free. So if you aren't already poking around on the Burning Glass website and sort of being mindful of what information they're putting out, that can be useful. I will also say there's a whole state effort now on what's called quality non-degree credentials, right? So the idea of a non-degree credential is it is a shorter term credential, maybe a certification, maybe a certificate, maybe a nano degree or some other badge. There are 738,000 different types of credentials in the United States, as calculated by a nonprofit called Credential Engine. Now, a lot of those are pretty familiar ones like degrees, 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, but there's also an enormous number of industry certifications, right? Some of you may have had learners who got a ServSafe certification for working in food safety. And so right now, one of the things that's happening is everybody is scrambling to figure out what kind of shorter term credentials are employers going to value in this moment, and which credentials actually have quality standards, right? So that you're not sending your learners chasing after something that's going to cost them time and money, but not really result in them finding better employment. And here again, I think talking to hiring managers, if you already have employer relationships, is really valuable. And it doesn't have to be something big and formal, right? It could be your brother-in-law who does hiring for a small manufacturing company. And if you just get 5 minutes with him to say, hey, what are you guys looking for right now when you're filling positions, or are you filling any positions? That's data, right? So don't think of it as you have to go cold call some stranger and try to get information out of them. That's really hard. Think about where you can tap your own networks. I do want to go back to one other thing and just mention, I have a blog post coming out next week. The challenge of when multiple family members are sharing one device is really tough, and we're hearing that from lots of people. So I have a blog post coming out next week talking about new guidance from the federal government about how TANF, SNAP ENT, and WIOA funds can be used to help cover digital device costs. So TANF is temporary assistance for needy families. SNAP is a supplemental nutrition assistance program, and WIOA is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Now, your organizations may or may not receive funding under these funding streams. Your learners may or may not be eligible under these funding streams. But you should also be aware that your state is very definitely getting funding under the CARES Act. And San Antonio, Texas has been really out front on this. So the CARES Act is the big $2 trillion bill that Congress passed back in March, trying to provide some COVID relief. And in San Antonio, they have explicitly said, we are going to spend a piece of our federal CARES Act money on digital inclusion issues, Wi-Fi hotspots, extra devices, help with digital literacy. If that is something that you are passionate about, this is a great opportunity for you to push your policymakers to say, hey, we got this money from the federal government. Can we use a piece of it to help deal with some of these digital divide issues? Also a great opportunity for you to build common cause with your friends in the K-12 school world and the public health world who have become very alert to how important digital divide issues are because it's causing problems for them in the work they're trying to do.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That is tremendous. We're running out of time for questions. Carol Baglio from East Boston Harborside has had her hand up for a while. I'm going to call on her, and I'm going to ask one question from the chat, and we're going to move into small groups within just a couple of minutes. So, Carol, go ahead.
Actually, Amanda was a mind reader for me because my question was going to relate directly to the digital inclusion and the barriers that our students face. And we had to give out a lot of Chromebooks this year because they only have one device or they don't have the most current device. We haven't worked out the kinks of the hotspots yet because you can purchase hotspots, but then who pays the bill? So there's lots of that. Those barriers prevent our students from really having true digital literacy learning right in their home, accessible to them so that they can access. So I was going to ask you, do you have any suggestions of how to get that? So I was writing real quickly as you were rattling off those things. I wouldn't have thought the TANF or SNAP funds could be used for digital literacy. So that surprised me. And we are, I'm a program, East Boston Harborside, and we are funded through WIOA funds. So we do get tech money to buy things for our students, but I don't have enough money to supply every student with a hotspot and a Chromebook to go home. So this was very interesting. You kind of answered my question, but that is the dilemma of our students, to have the current devices at home. Many of them for the Zoom classes were using their phones, not conducive to participating, easily.
Yeah. Thank you for your
suggestions.
Thank you, Carol. One more question from the chat. Are there data? This is from Fred Bennett at BCNC. Are there data on how successfully the ELL population has been able to secure jobs through virtual recruiting methods? That's a great question, and one I hope you might have some ideas about, Amanda.
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. I have not seen any such data. And in fact, I think more urgently, one of the challenges is that it's nobody's job to collect that kind of data, and nobody is paid to collect that kind of data. And so it's kind of challenging because a lot of people are recommending strategies that there's no research to prove are actually effective in helping people. And so one thing that I'm hoping is that as we all get a little deeper into this recovery from this recession, that some folks will actually invest in studying what is and isn't working, because my concern is we might give people advice based on a best guess where there really isn't data to support that being a meaningful opportunity for them. There too, I would also just again say your students are experts on their own lives, right? And so if you can do sort of informal check-ins with them and get a sense of how they are getting jobs, that in and of itself is data, right? And if you aggregate that data, if you put that data together with your fellow ENB members, that can help you better understand, at least on a local level, how people are getting hired right now and kind of what that looks like.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you again for coming and being our keynote guest. Everybody, let's give Amanda a round of applause.
Thanks so much.